Well, when I first saw the front cover of today's bulletin, I had to laugh. Now, some of you may know that our bulletin covers come to us from the UCC each week, and they're designed to match the scripture readings from the lectionary every Sunday. Now, as you saw, the front cover of your bulletin says, God-inspired joy. And I laughed because today's gospel reading is all about a beheading. The beheading of John the Baptist, and I thought, what's so joyful about that? But then I read the back cover of the bulletin, and God-inspired joy is a reference to the first reading from Samuel, from the Old Testament that Mike read for us, about King David dancing for joy before God. And I'm guessing that most pastors in the country this morning are focusing their sermons on that reading rather than on the gospel reading. And I get it. I mean, who on a beautiful summer Sunday morning wants to be talking about a beheading? I certainly don't. But I do think that today's gospel reading provides us with a really good opportunity to explore together who John the Baptist was and why he was killed. Because John the Baptist's story is foreshadowing of Jesus' story. Now, I've explained this to you before. The Bible was not written or meant to be understood as a history book. It's not a textbook. The Bible is meant to be understood as literature. That's why the Bible is full of things like symbolism and metaphor and myth. And so the scripture writers, when writing John the Baptist's story, were using it as foreshadowing of Jesus' story. So, for example, both of them had miraculous births. If you remember, the same angel who proclaimed to Mary that she was going to give birth to Jesus also proclaimed that Mary's kinswoman, Mary's cousin Elizabeth, was going to give birth to John the Baptist. And this was also miraculous because Elizabeth was old. She was well past childbearing years. Some say she was in her 90s. So these stories of miraculous births, they weren't uncommon in the ancient world. They were written to signify that this person is special. This person has been divinely appointed by God. And so the scripture writers were trying to establish that John the Baptist was born with this divine, special nature, was appointed by God to do great things. I just want to say on a side note, that really is true of all of us. All of us are special. God has chosen us. God has divinely appointed us to do great things as well. But that's a sermon for another time. John the Baptist and Jesus were cousins, but we don't really know if as boys or teenagers they hung out together. The scripture doesn't tell us any of that. All we know is that when Jesus began his ministry at the age of 30, John the Baptist already had a huge following around him. John the Baptist had already been preaching and teaching and awakening people, and he was quite popular. As we heard in our words of integration and guidance this morning, John and Jesus lived at a time where the world was broken. There was no accountability for political leaders. Justice was relative, and people's basic human rights were ignored. So John and Jesus came to establish something new. They came to start a revolution, a new world order. What is it about John and Jesus? What were they trying to establish? Well, they were trying to establish a world, a kingdom or a kingdom in which, in the words of Jesus, the last shall be made first. The people who were the least of these would be given the most importance. That was the kingdom, the world they were trying to establish. And it got them in trouble. John the Baptist baptized people with water. And he said Jesus was going to come and baptize people with fire. Jesus was going to light a fire underneath us. We were going to start a revolution. And of course, we see what happened. John the Baptist had to be beheaded. Jesus had to be crucified for speaking this way and for starting this revolution, this new world order, this countercultural movement. And we as Christians are called to do the same. That is what Christianity is all about. It's not supposed to be a tame message. It's supposed to be a radical, revolutionary message. Now, throughout our human history, there have been many people who have spoken this truth. People like Lincoln, people like Gandhi, people like Malcolm X, people like John F. Kennedy, people like Martin Luther King, people like Oscar Romero, people like Harvey Milk. Each and every one of those people was gunned down. All of them. Just like John the Baptist was beheaded, just like Jesus was executed. Because they were trying to establish a new kingdom where all are one. So it's dangerous work. But if you truly call yourself a Christian, you have to be about that work. It is why Daniel Berrigan was the late Jesuit priest and social activist. He just died in 2016. But Daniel Berrigan said, if you truly want to follow Jesus, you better look good on wood. Okay? Okay. And what he meant is, if you really want to do this, if you really call yourself a Christian, you've got to give up everything for this kingdom. You have to be willing to put your life on the line for it. And most of us don't want to do that. Now, I know that you know the stories of Jesus and Gandhi and Martin Luther King, but you may not be familiar with the story of a woman whose name was Dorothy Stang. Dorothy Stang was a Catholic nun, and in the 1960s and 70s, she taught in a Catholic elementary school in Illinois. But in her 40s, Sister Dorothy felt called to go work with the poor in Brazil. And during her years there, she became a very outspoken advocate for the poor rural farmers who were losing their land to the government, who was obviously profiting off of that. The rainforests were being depleted for money. So she became outspoken advocate for the poor farmers and also for the environment. She would often wear a t-shirt that said in Portuguese, "The death of the forest is the death of us." And because of her outspoken advocacy, she received a lot of death threats. One morning in 2005, she was on her way to speak at a community meeting, and she was met by two armed men. Sister Dorothy took out the Bible that she always carried with her, and she opened to Jesus' Beatitudes, and she read to the gunman, "Blessed are the poor, the kingdom is theirs." And right then, she was shot and killed. This is another example of someone speaking truth and losing their life for the sake of the kingdom. And it is, again, what we are being called to do. It is why Jesus, in his own words, said, if you want to follow my way of life, you must leave behind everything. You must put your life on the line. You must give up everything for the sake of the kingdom. But most of us don't want to do that. We want the nice religion. We want to come to church and feel good. We just want our religion to be about nice people doing nice things. The writer Naomi Schulman said, "Nice Christians made the best Nazis." She said, "My grandmother told me that those nice Christians, they didn't want to ruffle any feathers. They didn't want to get involved with this dirty thing called politics. They just wanted everybody to be nice. And so they turned a blind eye as their neighbors were being sent to concentration camps." But Naomi Schulman said, "You know who wasn't nice? The resistors. The resistors weren't nice." Many Christians want to focus on the white Jesus holding the little baby lamb. That wasn't Jesus. Jesus wasn't nice. There was an article in the Washington Post this week by the Christian writer whose name is Rachel Held Evans. I know there are a lot of fans of Rachel's here. In that article, she said, "The Bible is literature for the resistance." The Bible is literature for the resistance. And what she says in the article is that the Bible was written for oppressed minorities who were living under oppressive political regimes and political authorities. And the Bible's stories were stories of people resisting those regimes and those authorities. I think most of you know much of the New Testament was written by people who were in prison. That's where they wrote scripture from. They were thrown in prison by the political authorities of their time. They were resistors. And that is what it means to be Christian. That is what it means to go out and to build the kingdom, to speak this truth, to awaken people to the truth. I shared in the epistle, the weekly newsletter I send out on Fridays this week, I shared a quote from the Nobel Prize winner, Niels Bohr. And he said, "Every valuable human being should be a radical and a rebel. For our aim is to make the world better than it is." All of us are called to be radicals and rebels, because radicals and rebels see the world the way it is and they want change. They want to make it better than it is. That's why we were born. That's our call. And we have done that. I really want you to understand we have done that as a human race. Just in our lifetime alone, in the 20th century, we have seen vast improvements in workers' rights, in women's rights, in civil rights, in LGBT rights. How did all that happen? Because of the rebels and the radicals and the resistors. They're bringing about the kingdom. More and more people are afforded rights. More and more people are seeing themselves as kin, as one. So we are doing it. But as we know, we have right now so-called Christian leaders who want to dismantle those rights, the rights that people fought and died for. They want to dismantle those rights. That's why right now, if you call yourself a Christian, you cannot be silent. You cannot. But it will put you in danger. You may not have your head cut off, but you may be cut off from your family. You may not lose your life, but you may lose friends. That's okay. I want you to make sure that you don't get discouraged or lose hope, because the Bible was also a book of a new vision. It was a book for these oppressed people to know there's a new world, and we're visioning this new world. It's a world where the power of love will overcome the love of power, and you are to build that world. So Jesus was not wrong when he said the kingdom is at hand. It is. But Jesus of Nazareth is not coming back to do it. We are the second coming of the Christ, of which Jesus spoke. We are the ones to build the kingdom. We are the ones we've been waiting for. So let us go forth to continue to build that kingdom, to put on that revolutionary spirit, that rebel heart, that radical mind, that radical way of thinking, that shakes people up, that wakes people up. And let us have the courage to speak truth to the powers that be, for it is that truth that will set us all free. Namaste.